So, so that was just a sample, and I swear almost every session I went to, there was some talk of electrification and heat pumps. Next slide, please. So why now? Why is this happening? It really stems down to several factors. One of them, just clearly there are decarbonization policies being developed and put in place from the local, state, and national level. And decarbonization also involves clearly greening of the grid. It doesn't do any good to electrify if the grid is still heavily coal and carbon rich. So those two forces are coincident. Then there's also been a great improvement in heat pump performance. I think those of you who are really involved in this know that that's been a major barrier towards expanding their use in all types of climates. And then a related demand is with the rapid rise of renewables on the grid and other distributed energy resources. We're seeing that there's really a need for greater demand flexibility, and more electrified technologies can provide that through load control and interaction with the grid. Next slide, please. But there are certainly barriers for switching to heat pumps for space heating and cooling. There's still high first costs, even if there are lower life cycle costs. So people need to invest heavily up front to get these new systems, especially if they're retrofitting and making replacements ahead of end of life and things like that. So it is a big cost up front. There's also problems with just home readiness that for various reasons, the electrical and other system upgrades may be needed to switch over to a heat pump based systems. There's also customer preferences and unfamiliarity with this technology. I'm based in Madison, Wisconsin, a cold climate, and we sort of have learned to love our natural gas furnaces and blowing out hot air, and they're the old reliables. So replacing those, when we think of some of the polar vortices and things like that, kind of make people a little hesitant to embrace a new technology. And I know that we'll be talking more about that cold weather performance and how that's really being overcome. There's also just the perceived risks. Again, this relates to that hesitancy that we're just not 100% sure it's going to deliver when it really needs to, or it just flips over and is not so efficient and cheap. And then related to that, just contractors and suppliers are, in many cases, aren't used to dealing with this technology, and they like the old reliables and avoiding callbacks from their customers and making sure that they have warm or cool homes as needed. All right, next one. And I even ran into that unfamiliarity problem just a couple of years ago. I asked my contractor about a heat pump because my natural gas furnace is aging and getting there, and he just kind of looked at me with a cocked head and was going, "Oh, really? Okay, I guess." Well, he was kind of surprised, and I did get a follow-up, but that's changing rapidly. But there are certainly benefits to heat pumps and electrification for residents. There can be improved health and safety within the home. You don't have direct combustion sources and potential carbon monoxide and other hazards if it's electrified. It can be improved comfort. I think some of the heat pump systems can provide greater versatility in keeping different parts of your home at the temperatures and indoor conditions that you prefer. Can generally reduce energy costs. And again, these are life cycle costs, and we'll get to that in a minute, but it really depends on the climate, the energy costs, and the condition of the home and fuel costs. Also, and this is something that really became evident, sadly, last summer when we had the deadly heat waves in the Pacific Northwest, an area where many homes aren't air conditioned, and suddenly they were getting dangerous extreme temperatures. So providing air conditioning in places that traditionally haven't had that kind of cooling capability can be more important. Next one, please. And so now I'm just going to briefly touch on an ACEEE study that I didn't do, but some of my colleagues did. So I'm reporting on their results, and I'll give the link to the full report later for those more technical questions. But it was taking residential energy consumption survey data and then doing all kinds of modeling. They set up models at different types of homes in different climate zones, looked at equipment installed in the year 2030 at the end of life. And here there were some of the other assumptions used. So accounting for increased costs for different fuels and things, and just calculating the life cycle costs. Next slide, please. And just as a reminder here, just to show that the US, we're talking many different climate zones, from the deep freeze of the very upper Midwest to much more tropical-like climates. So looking at heat pumps across all these different climate zones. Next one, please. And this is the summary results, kind of whittled down to just a very small group here. And what I would just note, so the bottom axis there is the heating degree days. So you notice as you go to the right that those are the colder and colder temperatures. And just looking at the electric air source heat pumps is the red line that goes up. So in really cold climates, if it's just all electric, the life cycle costs did wind up being the most expensive. But then if you look at the purple line there, hybrid electric gas, that's using heat pumps with some kind of fossil fuel or backup, or possibly wood, I suppose. And then, so this is very summary results after all those thousands of modeled homes. Next one, please. And that was for air source heat pump for space heating and cooling. But then looking at the composite results, that if you looked across all these different combinations and looking at both all electric as well as hybrid systems where there's a heat pump with a fuel backup, that 81% of the US homes, the life cycle costs for switching to one of those kinds of heat pump based systems would be cost effective in life cycle. And just looking at the map quickly, you can kind of see there that especially in the Southeast, they're very cost effective for just about all homes. And then as you go into the northern climates, then those hybrid systems seem to be important to achieve cost effectiveness, but there's still plenty that also would be cost effective all electric. And again, the full results of this report you can get later. Next slide, please. And can't forget about heating water, so that heat pump water heaters are shown to be cost effective pretty much everywhere. Whatever combination, whatever type and storage, there's a lot of different combinations there. But so that's another technology that's increasing just as along with with the space heating and cooling. Next slide, please. Just a few things to wrap things up here. We don't want to forget the importance of energy efficiency to be packaged with heat pump conversions, that just like a lot of energy systems, if you reduce your load first, and that allows you to possibly get a smaller unit and just overall improves the life cycle costs. So we want to do both, making sure you're adding efficient technologies to an efficient building. And just looking at how that energy efficiency could help alternative fuels better compete with some of the electric options, and helps electric heat pumps minimize the need for fuel backup. So that's another important outcome by improving the building envelope, so that you may not really need that fuel source backup. All right, next one, please. All right. And here, just to wrapping up. So as a result of all these technologies and interest in electrification, that states are really updating their program designs to go to big scale for energy efficiency and electrification. That while not an exhaustive inventory of all programs, the work that ACEEE's done showed that in 2020, we counted just a little over $100 million in programs that were supporting heat pumps and electrification, and that's grown to 166 million. And I'm sure that number underestimates the total. It's just all happening so fast. The program design trends were encouraging weatherization to reduce loads alongside the new heat pumps. Some programs are offering pre-electrification or heat pump ready. In other words, getting at the envelope and making sure that's efficient before you add that load, make that change. Targeting upstream incentives to contractors and distributors. Clearly, that's really important since a lot of replacements of heating systems tend to be done at failure. So people aren't going to wait for supply to be delivered and whatever delays that would really be a serious problem for them. So having that technologies on trucks and ready to install is important. And then just updating program materials and incentives so that you're looking to reduce load, training contractors in cold climates to get familiar and comfortable with the technology, and then possibly offering some higher incentives for doing all this. All right, next one. I think this wraps things up. So again, this was a brief overview of what we see kind of nationally, where things seem to be headed. Here are some specific research reports that are available from ACEEE. Again, that top one is about programs and best practices, and then that modeling exercise. So a lot of information, and ACEEE isn't certainly the only place to get some good information. There's a lot out there now. So with that, we're going to switch to our next speaker, who's Dave Lease. And just a note that I saw that put your questions that come up in the chat. So thank you for your attention this morning, and welcome, Dave.
Good morning. Thanks, Dan. I was late in getting some slides in, so I think I'm just going to be providing some remarks this morning. I guess I think these are Kelly's slides, but I'll be slideless. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks again, Dan, and I'm glad I could jump in this morning to provide a few remarks. I am with Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships up in the Northeast. We are a regional energy efficiency program, much like our sister organization, SEIA, in your neck of the woods. We are about promoting energy efficiency. Electrification has become a broader objective of our organization in recent years, but efficiency is really core to our work. I'm trying to just sort of feed through some of what Dan talked about. I was going to make sort of some similar points, so I don't want to belabor that too much. NEEP has been operating a regional market transformation initiative for what had started as air source heat pumps back in 2013, and we have evolved that to a broader scope of what we call our heating electrification initiative. We're looking at advancing the market across a number of heat pump technologies in both the space heating and the water heating world, both air source technology, ground source technology, and as including for both space and domestic water heating. So a lot of opportunities. These are really two of the top energy users and really where emissions are coming out of homes and buildings. So really, important piece of the pie here to work towards efficiency and decarbonization. To Dan's point, this is technology that's been around for a long time. This is not unfamiliar technology, particularly in a state like Virginia. But it's really been a real turnaround and a sort of a bit of an evolution or a revolution of this technology, particularly on the air source side. This is really not your grandfather's or parents' heat pump technology today. So we've seen a number of technology advances in this space, which have not only improved efficiency for a lot of moderate climates, but made this technology a lot more of a solution in even colder climates. So we're really seeing these technologies delivering efficiency and capacity at low outdoor temperatures, and the diversity of types of systems that are available now in the market has really expanded. Everything from what you probably hear around ductless systems to probably a more traditional ducted system that you're familiar with in your market. A lot of hydronic heating in the Northeast. I'll get into that in a little bit, but has driven the ductless market quite a bit in our market. So similarly, like I said, back in 2014, we brought a group of regional stakeholders together to ask these kinds of questions. What are the barriers to adopting this kind of technology in our region? We brought together program administrators, policymakers, folks from the industry, and sort of laid this out in a market transformation strategy. And it echoed a lot of the things that Dan spoke about in terms of hesitancy and unfamiliarity on the consumer side. Similarly, on the contractor side, they are really, certainly the front line of the marketplace when it comes to HVAC decisions. So getting that community confident in the technology and capable of installing it is clearly one of those main strategies that we need to address. Upfront costs. In our territory, some of these advanced integrated control technologies, because we're often heating with, say, a ductless system and a secondary fossil system. So how do we get these systems to most effectively work together? And then we also have this issue of standards and specifications and performance metrics not exactly doing the job of differentiating systems particularly for systems in cold climate applications. So there was some work that needed to be done to sort of improve these metrics and the information available to the market. As far as kind of what we have seen in the market experience, as far as efficiency goes, there have been a number of in-field performance studies. We see performance fall in the roughly 200 to 300% efficiency, seasonal COPs in these cold climates. As you push further and further down into more moderate climates, that efficiency is likely to be higher and higher. As far as comfort goes, and again, this is in cold climates, this is in Vermont and New York and Massachusetts. There was a recent study of whole home systems that went in that were again whole home, taking care of they were the only heating systems in the homes, and the study found that 9 out of 10 consumers were extremely likely to recommend heat pumps to their friends and family. So we're seeing that not only can they perform efficiently, but they're delivering the heat and the comfort that consumers in cold climates are demanding. And we've seen there's been a really impressive market growth over the last, particularly in the last 5 years. We've seen roughly 25% year-over-year growth. In 2021, there were over 230,000 air source heat pumps sold in the New York and New England region. And sort of to put in context, that is basically the same amount of furnaces That's way more than the number of boilers put in and about the same amount of central AC. So clearly the market has really begun to embrace this technology. I will say that, again, most of the market in the Northeast, at least to date, has really been dominated by ductless systems. And I guess just a few notes on sort of what is contributing to the growth here. We have probably a little bit different than further down the Mid-Atlantic and into Virginia, have a lot of delivered fuels, so expensive heating oil, propane, particularly in northern New England, really started to kind of drive that early adoption 10-ish years ago. There's an increasing interest in cooling in our region. So these heat pumps are obviously delivering affordable heating. They're delivering cooling to a lot of customers that might have not have had it or had inefficient small window units. Certainly, there's a robust landscape of program incentives in the Northeast, pushing this technology. We have supporting policies on top of that, and then certainly I think working regionally has that regional coordination has helped this market grow in the past several years, as I mentioned. I have a slide on sort of model program elements. What are some of those program elements that we're seeing a lot of in our region? Working both sort of upstream and downstream, working at the kind of consumer level and at the midstream contractor distributor level. Certainly consumer education, working with the workforce, promoting both sort of the dual fuel displacement scenario as well as the whole home, baking in the weatherization, as Dan mentioned, and the quality assurance. A lot of programs are really doing the work to go back into the field and making sure that consumers are not only getting an efficient system, but they're getting they're getting the comfort that they expect. I'm going to jump over. I mentioned sort of some of these supporting policies in the region. A number of states have set specific targets for heat pumps, which has really given the market a lot of certainty and confidence to know that there's a long-term ramp here to bring this technology to the region. We have policies under a lot of our energy efficiency programs that allow for some level of fuel switching, which allows the programs to promote to customers that may have some form of fossil fuel system. The new construction codes and standards is a place that is being looked at, and we're seeing some early sort of inroads into electrification in those spaces. The workforce, the financing, and I'll finish with a few resources that are available on NEEP's website. As I mentioned, one of the areas that was identified early on was this opportunity need to better differentiate systems that were capable of cold climate performance. And so we have a product list and a website that identifies these systems that meet particular specifications. And it's also a great tool for sizing systems for particular applications. We have some consumer buying guidance resources. Similarly, we have some best practices for installers around sizing and installing systems, which I can drop in the chat. And I guess just in wrapping up, I think to Dan's point, sort of this combination of heat pumps and weatherization really offer very scalable solutions right now. Heat pumps are performing in our climates. Up here in the Northeast, they can certainly perform well in Virginia's climate. And we're even in these cold climates seeing a shift from this dual fuel or partial displacement to some applications that are whole home. And there are certainly important roles for incentives and for regulation to help transform this market at scale. and pace. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks,
Very
everyone.
good. Very good. Thanks so much, Dave. And again, Dave stepped in at the last minute, so has done a remarkable job in just capturing a nice picture of what's happening up in the northeast part of the country. And I might just also highlight some resources besides some of those great ones that Dave just mentioned available from NEEP. I know that Efficiency Vermont has been a leader on researching the performance of heat pumps in cold climates. And here in the Midwest, the Center for Energy Environment has done a lot of work in that same area, as well as Slipstream. So there's a lot of research and demonstration going on, as well as just practical experience. It's really growing. So a lot of information out there to help you. And so now we're going, one other quick comment is, do keep adding your questions in the chat. I've seen one at least pop up there, and we're going to save those for the end for our panelists to address. So next, we're going to be switching to Maggie, talking about things in the Southeast. Welcome, Maggie.
Thanks, Dan. Hey, everyone. My name is Maggie Kelly-Riggins, and I am with the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. I am also the vice chair of the Virginia Energy Efficiency Council's board of directors, and so I'm really grateful to have you all here today and chatting about heat pumps. So, as Dan, with my introduction alluded to, I lead our building portfolio at the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. And Rebecca, if you can advance to the next slide. SEIA is a regional energy efficiency organization. So we work with folks like Dave up at NEEP. We call ourselves the EEPs and the EIAs. So we collectively serve all of the United States, all 56 states and territories that DOE serves. And we're happy to do it. At SEIA, we serve 11 states across the Southeast. And in my work, I also serve 5 US island territories in both the Caribbean and the Pacific Ocean. And so really and truly in our work, we think about energy efficiency first and additional technologies, practices, policies that can advance activity in the Southeast, from workforce development to economic and energy security. So if you'll advance to the next slide for me, I just want to kind of ground us first a little bit and see its values. My hope is that they'll show up some, and you'll kind of see that in some of the work that we talked about today. But really and truly, the work that we do and what we work to try to inspire our region to do, which of course includes Virginia, is for folks in our sector to take initiative, to value others, to earn trust, and to pursue equitable solutions. And so when we take on initiatives or projects or expanding our work areas to include heat pump initiatives, for example, we want to make sure that these values are front and center in the work that we do, and ensuring that what we take on and what we partner with really kind of sit in these particular 4 values. So let's get to kind of, Dan and Dave have really dug really deeply into what they're seeing nationally and then the Northeast. And what you'll see is they're not all that different in the Southeast, though maybe we'll have a little bit of Southern flavor on top of that. So Rebecca, if you'll go to this next slide. Okay, so our Southeast heat pump trends. If you can see one of my mini splits kind of right here behind me. I do have a heat pump system. I have a ductless system in my home, and we're one of the most energy efficient homes on my street and kind of in my dead end area. But what we notice, and in my conversations with folks, is that these 4 particular pieces that are shared here are generally not only what's happening in Atlanta and the big cities where I am, but really across the Southeast region. The first is electrification. So electrification is the conversation, it's the name of the game. What most people don't recognize, though, is that the Southeast is already highly electrified. We, back in the 2010 residential energy consumption data, which there is new data, the 2020 data is out, but it is not as updated. So they're trying to get more heat pump data in there just so that we can know more. But in the 2016 data, we saw that about 68% of the Southeast was using electric water heating, electric resistance water heating, and a little bit less, about 60% were using electric space heating and cooling. And so when Dan alluded to earlier, really having to do electrical panel upgrades, or the pieces to switch from gas or another type of fuel to electric, you do create those additional barriers. What we know, though, is in the Southeast, those barriers are significantly less than a lot of the rest of the country. I think some of the only spaces that are not as electrified would be the Mississippi Delta, where there's still a lot of propane use. And then, of course, in our rural areas. The rural electrification is really important in some of the conversations we have around equity, is that making sure that our folks who are in our rural geographic areas have access to electrification. And that goes for space heating and cooling, but other electrification technologies as well. I think one of the big pieces that we're all learning quite constantly is affordability. Folks talked about costs, and we'll talk about them again in a moment, but we do see, largely because of federal and local efforts in the Southeast, we're starting to see some traction on affordability pathways from the federal incentives that are coming down the line through the Inflation Reduction Act. But also there are local efforts. There's a group in Southeast Florida, the Southeast Climate Change Compact, who has recently put out, or they officially passed, a plan around strategizing for energy efficiency in their 4-county region. And one of those strategies is particularly sitting around incentivizing heat pumps for low-income populations and multifamily buildings in that region. One thing that, and we'll talk about this throughout the forum, but workforce training and support, there's a lot of momentum from federal level, state levels. I know Virginia Energy is really paying attention to and really jumping into that workforce training and support. So that's exciting to see. And then high levels of interest. I think, the conversation is starting to include heat pumps. Actually, some of the 2 photos that are here are specifically from, we got licensed to use them from some of our utility websites. And so we have, the messaging, the framing, the conversation is there. I think kind of the piece to note, though, is that this interest is largely coming to and from folks who are centered in and understand the discussion around climate, around electrification. There are lots of Southeasterners who are left out of this conversation, which we'll talk about just real quick, and the challenges. So Rebecca, if you'll advance for me. Oh, don't know what happened. There we go. Animation is a fun thing. So, these are challenges and opportunities for heat pumps, specifically in the Southeast. But I think as you've heard, they really do span the country. What I'll say is I'll try to give some Southeast flavor. So we'll start with the regulatory environment. I know Dave alluded to particular incentives or regulatory programs that come out of energy efficiency programs, whether it's a state level or utility level work. There are a lot of regulation barriers in the Southeast for incentives and programs from utilities and government entities. In the Southeast, there are several states, in fact, that the public service commissions have created specific rules and processes for utilities, investor-owned utilities in particular, to create incentives. So the lack of ability to fuel switch requires, for instance, some utilities to compare the savings of a gas heat pump to an electric heat pump, which are, the savings are not enough to create an entire energy efficiency program and to collect costs back on ratepayers comparatively to a gas furnace system and a heat pump. When we talk about and think about our regulatory environment, there are quite a few utilities who would love to do another heat pump incentive, create more electrons for their own service and territory, but the incentive structure and the regulatory environment is not as open and kind to the air source heat pumps as they would be for instance, heat pump water heaters, which you can find incentives for at almost every investor-owned utility in the Southeast. Also, training and education. Like I said, we'll get more into this, I think, throughout the fall forum, but really and truly, there is a training gap in the Southeast. Ourselves at SIA, as well as Veridient. I think Sean is in this group, Sean Shanley from Veridient. We are working tirelessly in Virginia to think about how we actually train folks for advanced technologies, and that includes heat pumps. I think really and truly within that, it's getting training and resources on the ground that people trust and are confident in. So I'll speak more to that trust and confidence piece. There, while heat pumps have been around for a long time, the current model and the conversation around them nationally have been really about climate and electrification. And what we know about the South is that those conversations do not always move the chains on policy. And acceptance in our region from consumers, from the workforce, or just policy makers and kind of the decision makers and stakeholders in our communities. What we do see conversations and excitement around is affordability, which we'll get into in a moment. It's also around energy independence. So I'm not sure if anyone else also is in the space where they get lots of heat pump related content on social media. And I think Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok have figured out that I work with heat pumps. But the Washington Post a few weeks back actually posted an incredible story around the rise of heat pumps and energy of independence in Poland, largely due to the desire to reduce their use of Russian natural gas. And so, really this focus around how peace and, these pieces of fighting back against, for in Poland in particular, the Russian use of the use of Russian natural gas was really interesting, right? In the Southeast, whether you're in Virginia or you're somewhere else in the region, you may be seeing political commercials about energy independence right now. A lot of conversations, whether it's about the gas pump or your electric bill, those conversations happen. And so I think really and truly, it's about messaging and framing and helping folks understand and trust the technology and the outcomes of the technology. It's not necessarily, people don't necessarily see or interact with their compressor systems or those pieces in the same way as necessarily their thermostat or a refrigerator or other appliances in their home. However, if we can create that trust and confidence in the product and help people not think twice about it and not think twice about utilizing a heat pump, that really is a part of the game. Costs are really important. So Dan shared kind of a landscape of what costs look like, and especially the upfront costs. And we know that there are some federal incentives on the way. But what I'll say and what I'll remind us of is that pre-pandemic, the Southeast, so in 2019, 40% of the households in the Southeast were at or below the federal poverty line. So if we're thinking about real and true transformative cost support, and making this equipment affordable and creating easy access and reducing barriers around cost, we have to be really creative. We have to be thoughtful and recognize that incentive programs or blanket rebates and tax credits may not actually be as effective in the Southeast, or may not go as far, quite frankly, because of someone's, the difference in the income that already exists. And then, of course, supply, keeping them in supply. I think Dan and maybe Dave also alluded to this. When you need heating and cooling in the South, especially cooling, you need cooling. I'm sure all of us maybe have experienced a day in August where the coil is frozen over, or so something happens and it is now 95 degrees, both outside and inside. And we know that you call and you get the first person to come out that can support, that can help, whether that's a replacement or a repair on your systems. It's really and truly about making sure that when somebody wants something or needs support around heat pump technology, that it's on the ground and ready for consumers. And I'll say the manufacturers that we work with at SIA, particularly Mitsubishi and Daikin and Lennox, these manufacturers are trying to figure out how to increase supply, both in box stores like Lowe's and Home Depot, both headquartered in the Southeast, but also really focusing on making sure that our workforce knows to keep it in play and to offer it to consumers on the ground. And lastly, and I think really importantly, throughout each of these other items is equitable adoption. And so when we put people at the center of the regulatory process or training and education, the cost conversation, the supplying pieces, to building the trust and confidence, not just in the technology, but in each other, we make sure that all of the deployment strategies that we can come up with, the adoption processes, the evaluation work that we're doing around heat pumps needs to keep folks at the center, and that's both low income equitable adoption and ensuring that these technologies are in programs like weatherization or within our low income utility programs, or just if there's a Cash for Clunkers program like they're doing in Southeast Florida, that we're really focusing on and intentionally involving low income communities where that month to month saving can make just such a much larger difference in their day-to-day lives. But also when we're thinking about folks who have had traditional lack of access to capital for technologies like our Black, Indigenous, and other persons of color, in those communities. When we think about redlining, when we think about, the process of funding and federal investment and local bank investment, private investment, communities that were left out intentionally just based on race from 1933 to 1977, when air conditioning and heating and cooling first came online, those communities are still suffering with inefficient housing stock, inefficient technologies, lack of access to capital, and policies and processes within institutions that still intentionally leave them out. And so thinking about how we involve and engage and intentionally bring those communities into the conversation on adoption is important. And then lastly, the rural conversation. A lot of folks in the Southeast live in cities. That's for sure. Cities have incredible weatherization and energy efficiency processes and policies throughout the Southeast, and especially in Virginia. But what we also know is that we have to involve our whole Southeast, and that includes our folks that are in more rural and exurban areas. And so ensuring that every single person, every single household, every single business in the Southeast has access to heat pumps is incredibly important. We're not going to be there today, tomorrow, and I hope with the spending through the federal investment, we're there in a decade for all of us. But really and truly, we have a lot of challenges in our region. But when I see challenges, I see also opportunities for growth and change. So thank you for your time today. I'm really grateful to be able to share some about the Southeast, and I look forward to your questions later. I'll turn it back over to Dan.
Great. Thanks so much, Maggie. And I really appreciate how you brought in the other real hot topic at the ACEEE summer study, which was energy equity and making sure that we're bringing all households and customers along with the clean energy revolution. So besides electrification and heat pumps, equity was very dominant, and great to see. Those are kind of two developments that 10 years ago we're kind of talked about somewhat, and we certainly recognize some of that, but not now. They've really risen to the forefront. So with that, we're now going to switch to our last speaker, Louis. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My camera has all of a sudden started acting persnickety, and it will not reconnect, and it's the only external camera I have. So I may need to remain off camera. I will try a couple times during the presentation to bring it back on, so I apologize. Good morning. My name is Louis O'Berry with Rappahannock Electric Cooperative. I'm the Energy Services and Solutions Administrator at REC, and I'm glad to speak with you this morning. I'll probably be echoing a little bit from our previous and my fellow panelists. This has been some great information, and I think echoing a few of these points will just drive the presentation home a little bit further for the group. So thanks for the opportunity to join you this morning. Next slide. So at REC, our main goal is connecting our members and communities with safe, reliable, and affordable electric service. And along with that comes with providing sustainable energy solutions. And that comes from our member-facing programs to how we operate our grid and how we deliver energy to our membership. Next slide. A quick few facts about REC. I see a lot of familiar faces in the room this morning, so many of you may know about us already, but for those that do not, just a few quick facts about our utility. We serve portions of 22 counties in the state of Virginia. We have 4,000 square miles of total territory, 170,000, give or take, maybe a little more, a little less, depending on the day, of total connections. And I'll drive home the point this morning from a residential perspective. About 138,000 of that 170 is residential. So our residential membership is fairly large by comparison. We have about 17,500 miles of line with about 10 accounts per mile, per square mile, about 416 million in annual revenue, and a little over 430 employees. Next slide. So we can all agree here that that heat pump solutions are well evolved in Virginia and in our territory in the U.S. wide. So of those types, we see a multitude within our demographic with ducted air source heat pumps, and they could be a variety of unitary product, which would be your typical ducted conventional HVAC systems, and along with inverter type mini split ducted solutions. Now, those of you that are tuned in with the industry, I see a few HVAC folks in the room this morning. The Mitsubishis and the Daikins of the world, and some of the mini split ductless manufacturers are now producing equipment that is viable with a variable speed air handler and some ducted options to incorporate in their mini split heat pump lineup. So when I say ducted air source, as the technology has advanced, so have they. So we've got ducted type, we've got ductless or true ductless systems that you may be familiar with. That would be your inverter and non-inverter mini splits, and ground source heat pumps. They've been in Virginia and they've been in our territory for a long time. They're not a large percentage of it, but some of you may know ground source is geothermal. Regardless, all of these solutions are viable comfort solutions for our territory in Virginia, and you'll see some of those demographics as we get down into the slides. But just as a reminder, we are in climate zone 4 in the state of Virginia, and a kind of a mixed humid climate. So heat pumps as a whole are a great fit for that. Next slide. So some advantages of heat pumps. There's an onslaught. We could put together multiple slides of advantages of heat pumps, right? But I'll just kind of name a few just that are kind of right off the cuff and off the top of mind. So one of the main advantages is that our climate zone is a great opportunity and a great demographic for heat pump implementation. And if we look at it as compared to other sources of heat, even electric resistive down through fossil fuel, units of heat delivered per unit of energy consumed is much larger, right? So looking at that as a whole, a lot of heat pumps can give us up to 4 units of energy. 4 units of heat for 1 unit of energy. And when we look at electric resistive heat as it compares to heat pumps, they're an honest 50% more efficient at heating the space as it relates to electric resistive heat. And electric resistive heat is about equivalent to about $3.20 a gallon of propane if we look at LP fuel at 100% AFUE. So even looking at some of your higher cost heating solutions, heat pumps are going to give you more heat for the dollar. So huge advantage there. They're safe to operate, simple to maintain. You don't have as many operating components, not quite as much maintenance involved with some fossil fuel appliances such as oil or gas that require a little bit more intricate maintenance to keep them operating cleanly and effectively and efficiently. So they're a little bit more simple to maintain. They still require maintenance. They still require at least an annual visit to make sure everything is working as it should, but a few less components, a little bit less to go wrong, and they're a little bit simpler to maintain. Technology advancements, everybody before me has alluded to this, but technology in heat pumps has extremely advanced over the last 10 to 15 years. We are not working with the heat pumps that are, that of the 80s and 90s. It's come a very long way. So now we have warm air delivery with variable speed fans and compressors or multi-stage compressors. So the use of ECM and variable speed motors and heat pump equipment have really kind of made the heat pump move up on the list, if you will, with the ability to produce warmer discharge temperatures. So a lot of this, from the consumer side, going, well, I may not want a heat pump because it just doesn't put out warm air. I just can't feel that heat coming out of the register. So even though the temperatures may be a little cooler than a typical fossil fuel appliance, they're very effective at heating a space. And when you blend that with multi-stage and or variable speed technology, we increase the delta T or the temperature difference across the coil, and we get a much better rate of, and we get better comfort all the way around, and the end user is more satisfied with the end result. So improved equipment ratings, the SEER ratings, they're constantly going up. They're constantly being improved. The SEERs, the EERs, the heating season performance factors are all increasing, and some of our heat pumps now, with the inverter technology and some of the mini splits are well over 20 SEER, and with geothermal or ground source heat pumps being in the in the 5 COP range in cooling. So I mean, we get a lot of you have a lot of options to choose from. You have an opportunity to retrofit these systems into multiple applications, and as it was alluded to before, it can be done with a hybrid approach, or it can be done standalone all electric. So heat pumps have come a long way in the technology and the efficiency standards and the wide range of product that each manufacturer has to choose from to fit any specific either new construction or residential retrofit needs. And obviously they reduce the greenhouse gas potential, and a lot of conversation is driven around that. I'm not going to belabor it. My fellow panelists have discussed this pretty well already, but all these factors combined make heat pumps a very viable install and retrofit options in our residential territory. Next slide. So this is just a quick capture from a recent study funded by the Clean Collaborative, looking at heat pump adoption at the U.S. level. These numbers are fairly consistent with what was shared earlier, and we can all see that heat pumps in new construction is adopted pretty well across the U.S. and within our territory. We see heat pump installation on a very regular basis in new construction. So I think we've done a good job over the years with code advancement and in Virginia, as it relates to Virginia, and just promoting the use of heat pumps in new construction applications. I think we're doing a pretty good job there. I think if there's any meat on the bone in places where we need to look at retrofit options, that would be the place we need to spend a little bit more time on. Although it's the numbers are increasing when it comes to heat pump adoption in the U.S. Retrofits in existing homes and buildings is definitely an area of improvement. Next slide. So heat pump adoption rates as far as REC is concerned. Every other year we conduct a energy efficiency survey in collection with our generation and transmission cooperative, ODEC, and through that information, we've been able to compile some very strong data that gives us a perspective of what our adoption rates look like at a utility level. And I think that was the primary reason for me to come here and speak with you, to kind of give you a perspective of what it looks like within our demographic within Virginia. So when it comes to cooling systems, 54% of our members say that they use the electric heat pump as their primary cooling system. With 42% being electric central AC with something else. It could be electric resistive heat. It could be coupled with a fossil fuel appliance of sorts, or it may be window AC with a furnace. So central ACs are still pretty predominant, but also, as you can see, our heat pump adoption rate is pretty strong throughout our territory. Geothermal or ground source heat pumps are a smaller percentage of that, and we see most of those ground source heat pumps installed in homes that are less than 10, that were built in the last 10 to 15 years or so. So it's kind of a niche market, if you will. The tax credits drove those sales, and typically we see that in our area in new construction, not quite as much in the retrofit market, but it still exists. There are still homes out there that will convert from air source to ground source heat pumps as well. Next slide. And from the heating perspective, so this is where it gets a little bit stronger. Looking at that survey and extrapolating those results as it would relate to our residential membership, we've got about a 63% adoption rate on heat pumps, which is pretty strong. There's always room for improvement there. There's other systems out there that are still in use within our territory, but also it's a variety of housing stock. It may be a portion of that may be modular or mobile homes that have a combination of either fossil fuel with air conditioning or electric resistive heat with air conditioning. So there's definitely some opportunity out there. And there's also some barriers for some of those homes to actually retrofit heat pumps. And we'll talk about a few of those in a moment. But when we ask questions like what do you use as your secondary heating system, 29% of those folks said they have an all-electric heat pump. So portions of our territory that are closer to municipalities and some of those suburban areas do have mixed fuels, whether it be natural gas or LP. At least one of those systems in some of those multi-zone houses, the upstairs system is typically an all-electric heat pump, where the downstairs is either a combined fossil fuel with a hybrid approach, or a fossil fuel appliance with a straight air conditioner. So I won't go over the pie chart in huge detail, but as you can see, the adoption rate for all-electric heat pumps, generally speaking, within our territory is pretty strong at 63% adoption. Next slide. So just some barriers at a glance, and I know previously we discussed a lot of these, and they surround both industry standards, manufacturers, and everybody that's involved in making heat pumps more accessible and easier to install and easier to retrofit. But some of the barriers to include retrofit costs. We've got some solutions to that. With the IRA funding coming down line, that's definitely going to open up some additional rebates and incentives and reduce those barriers for all of our residential rate class when it comes to retrofitting. But there's still a large upfront cost, right? So even on retrofits where they're moving away from an appliance that may be costing them more to utilize for heating and trying to present a solution, there may be other things that need to be done, right? The existing equipment and duct conditions in the home. Homes that had older fossil fuel systems are typically not suitable for heat pump airflow, and it involves an additional retrofit cost to get those equipment and ducts up to sound, up to snuff, if you will. And that requires our contractors to do sound engineering, providing good equipment specifications, utilizing manual J, D, and S for proper sizing and reworking the existing ductwork or installing new ductwork if needed in some of these homes. And for some, that's a barrier, and primarily it could be cost. Weatherization, not all homes are ideal candidates from the word go from a retrofit standpoint for a heat pump. There could be some additional weatherization needs that need to be addressed. And, a solution to that, more all-encompassing weatherization, more utility programs, more things that can help reduce the barrier to access, especially in disadvantaged communities with respect to weatherization, because, and also market rate programs to assist end users and homeowners to be able to get their house ready for an electric heat pump. Manufacturers, always have work to do there. Education, workforce development, technicians, getting consistent and clear communication about the benefits of heat pumps and the energy that and dollars that are saved from a heating and cooling perspective annually. Maybe even going as far as rebranding a little bit and rebranding that technology to make the heat pump more marketable, because from the end user lens, many times they think of a heat pump and they think about the heat pump that their parents had, and they were always cold and it felt drafty, and it just didn't seem to, quote unquote, keep the house warm. So heat pump technology has been around a long time. It's come a long way. However, over the years, the perception of heat pumps and their ability to effectively heat and cool a home, from a comfort perspective, manufacturers have some work to do there. And obviously from an environmental standpoint, moving to low to no GWP refrigerants, reducing greenhouse gas potential. Heat pumps have a pretty major role in that, and energy efficiency as a whole. The more adoption we encompass there, the more greenhouse gas potential reduction that we have in that with that respect. Next slide. What is REC doing now? Just to kind of give you a quick plug, we just launched a new Vividly Brighter Upgrades residential affordable energy efficiency program that just launched early of August of 2022, and that is a first of its kind in Virginia that provides a pathway for the utility to invest on the front end for efficiency upgrades as a result of a diagnostic audit. And the member has the ability to repay that investment over time, and those upgrades are actually attached to the metered location. So it's not personal debt. It's an income agnostic program. It definitely targets high usage or high energy burden and high energy intensity. But the program is just getting launched, and we're in our first inception phase of it right now. And we're really excited about the potential improvements to not only the quality of life for our members, but also the resiliency of our grid. And with that, I will leave some time for some questions. Thank you very much. And I apologize for the camera. My camera has failed this morning for some reason all of a sudden.
Very good. Well, thanks. I think some of us would probably prefer that our cameras would fail at different times. But all right, this was great from the big national perspective, regional perspectives, and now a utility getting these technology out there. So we do have a few questions, and what I propose to do is I'm going to raise the questions first with our panelists, and then, because I'm sure there's some of those of you listening in who are also have experience and expertise in some of these things. If you would want to chime in after I give the panelists a chance, I'll make a note and open it up to others. So you can just unmute yourself. So without any further ado, the first question is regarding, here it goes. I thought heat pump water heaters are not recommended if your water heater is in a closet in your home as opposed to a more open area like a garage, because it needs airflow to be efficient and effective. And also if inside your home, it might be noisy. So I'll throw that out to the panelists to address if they can, and any response there.
I'm happy to kick that off. My heat pump water heater is in my basement. I fully acknowledge that. They are much easier installs and have a greater adoption rate inside of garages and in basements. It's not impossible to put them inside of water heater or closets inside of spaces. You do get an added bonus of some off conditioned air and dehumidification, depending on where you are. The dehumidification changes, that level of how much you really need in a home. But what I'll say is that the heat pump technology is coming a long way from sizing changes. I know that there's a couple of manufacturers who are working on smaller units, especially for multifamily applications. The noise, it's there, but it's about the same, I'll say for mine, and I have a first generation GE GeoSpring, which is now taken care of by Bradford White. It can be noisy. I think it's about utilizing it properly, and knowing when to have it in hybrid mode versus heat pump mode, kind of learning about the runtime and the utilization. I mean, it's not as ideal for installation, and the garages, basements, easiest place to install for sure. But in the Southeast in particular, my basement stays really cool in the summer. I'll say that. In August, I walked into the basement and I was like, oh, this is my new favorite place in the house, largely just from heating water. But it's not impossible, and it's not all manufactured units work the same. And so I think it would be about talking to plumbers, or maybe even some of the teams within Virginia, like Viridiant, who work around with these technologies, to learn more about what might be the best application for your household or for other consumers.
Very good. Louis or Dave, any comments on top of that?
I could just add, I think Maggie covered that pretty well. I mean, closets and tight spaces, the size of the equipment is kind of, it's more of a barrier than anything. One thing to remember, and none of these approaches, when it comes to heat pump water heaters, every home is a little bit different. Everybody's case in use case is a little bit different. And really, it just, I think, due diligence to make sure that upgrade pencils out for what you for what you need, because there's not a one size fits all there. I mean, in reality, you are removing heat from a conditioned space to heat the water. So you're paying for that. You got to pay to heat the house, and then you're moving some of that heat and utilizing that to heat the water. I think they have a lot of benefits, especially inside of a conditioned space, for some supplemental dehumidification, especially in the deep south, where you have a lot of humidity to deal with. And even in our demographic, I think sometimes advice that I'll give to our members, or I have given in the past, is that if you have a basement and you want to convert to a heat pump water heater, it will definitely do some additional supplemental dehumidification, and you'll get the benefits of the heat pump operation, and you'll also get those benefits. However, I've done some workups for some members in the past that have a very minimal amount of users. All the kids have flown the nest, and it's just them in the house now. They don't use a lot of hot water. So sometimes a heat pump water heater, it takes a little bit longer to pay back, just because of the number of users on the system. So it's not a one size fits all, but it certainly is a good opportunity for electrification and more efficient than standard electric tank water heater.
Very good. And I see we've got an audience member. Tim, do you have your hand up? You want to comment on that? Get off mute. Oh,
Sorry
great.
about that. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just wanted to mention, with this discussion of the heat pump water heaters, back in the 1990s, we did a pilot program, we being Dominion, did a pilot program with heat pump water heaters that were actually add-on heat pump water heaters, basically about 1.5 feet high by about 1 foot square box. And Virginia has a lot of crawl spaces. What we did was add on these heat pump water heaters, put them in the crawl space, and piped them to whatever standard water tank the customer actually had. And they had a little controller so that if they couldn't keep up, they would bring on whatever the traditional source of fuel was. But it ended up solving the noise problem. And it also was a very beneficial dehumidification source for your crawl spaces, which benefited a lot of the customers that we tried this out at. The problem is, I don't see those much on the market. And if you mention it to an installer, they give you a blank stare. Nobody seems to know anything about add-on heat pump water heaters. All they know is the integrated tank water heaters.
Very interesting. Okay, thank you. That's great. Maybe we'll have to talk to some manufacturers and have them new product development or old product redevelopment. All right, I'm going to move on to the next question, and let's see. David already answered it to the chat, but I think it's worth elevating to the whole group here. So the question is actually from Jim. What are some successful approaches for heat pump conversions on hydronic systems, both residential and commercial? And Dave, you answered it in the chat, but why don't you answer that to the whole crowd here?
Right, there is a lot of hydronic in the Northeast, so this is a challenge for retrofit issues, applications. The big challenge is that a lot of the hydronic distribution and the boilers that were servicing the hydronic distribution, the whole system was designed for very high temperature water, 180-degree water, or in some cases steam. And so you have certain size radiators that are designed with that kind of temperature water. And today, basically kind of cutting edge air to water heat pump systems that are the same as air source heat pumps, but are basically dumping that into water for distribution, are generating 120-degree water. And so applying that temperature water to an existing system that is really designed for very high temperature water, obviously there's a discrepancy there, and you're not getting the same amount of, in many cases, enough heat to make that kind of a drop-in situation. That being said, if you're creating the system from scratch, a lot of people love hydronic heat in homes, and they can easily design it in new construction. I'm thinking like radiant floor heating. There's all kinds of ways you can design that from scratch, but it's a lot more challenging to do with existing systems. So that's really the challenge right now, and trying to, as I think the future is, can we boost that water through heat pump systems? It's possible, it's expensive, but it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, very good. I'm going to go to the one last question here. We're a couple minutes over time, and I'll just want to wrap this up and give you a break before the next session. I guess there's some networking time. So the question is, what data exists, if any, that can identify the existing households and/or businesses in Virginia that should be targeted for heat pumps? Anyone want to tackle that one?
It's a hard one. I'll say that. I think, we do have, more state-specific residential energy code consumption or residential energy consumption survey data that has recently been updated. I know SEIA is working through, I think we can get down to a state level, maybe even a little deeper now, to kind of understand where heat pump technology is already penetrating. But that's just on the residential side. I think there's a lot of ability to kind of do more around the commercial side as well. I think a lot of it will likely come from working with utility partners. And so that's a really important partnership, especially Bettina for your work at Virginia Energy, to do those types of scenario planning. That's what's hard about this, is that if utilities and other folks that are installing, our workforce or manufacturers, don't have complete data sets around heat pumps right now, in the Southeast, like they do in some other regions. But at the same time, I think as we start to collect more of that data, we start to do more messaging, framing, and other pieces, we can collect more to kind of understand where we might intentionally focus heat pump programs. I think, one of the big areas where we do have a lot of data that can be utilized in this way is around weatherization. And so we have a lot of data around who's applying for weatherization, what their housing, energy use intensity is, what those pieces of equipment are already within their home. And so that really does create an intentional focus area. But largely, while there are data sets that can exist, it really depends on the type of program and type of intentionality you want to have, whether that's, more rural or co-op IOU territory. Rappahannock is doing a lot, as Louis shared earlier. So it is a hard question to answer, because while there's data, it may not be complete or necessarily helpful in this type of planning. But I do think that especially the weatherization space is a good place where there might be more complete data sets.
Very good. With that, we're a little bit over. So I first have to give a big thanks to our panelists, Maggie, Dave, and Louis, and for Virginia Energy Efficiency Council for organizing the forum. And thank to all of you for participation today. And I guess now you can all leave the room and give you a goodbye wave here. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all so much. We are